Live. Good morning, everyone. It's a beautiful Monday, is it not? May I please ask everyone to just please come to sit at the front so that we can be at the same place. I think if we can try to sit on this side and behind the Prof. Ngaweni and this side on my left, I think that will be okay. I have not gotten an indication from our technical team if the online has already started. If it has started, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Bongani Maimele. I'm from the National School of Government, and I'll be your program director for today's symposium. I cannot get an indication from the technical team if we have started or not. We have. Okay, great. Thank you very much for that. So, good morning once more, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this T20 symposium convened by the National School of Government of South Africa and the Institute for Global Dialogue. It is quite an important symposium to discuss a very important topic. And just to introduce myself again, my name is Bongani Maimele. I'm from the National School of Government. and I'll be the program director for today. Just to quickly outline how the program looks like, as I'll hand over to the acting principal to give opening remarks. So what is going to happen is that it is the opening remarks by the acting principal, and that will be followed by the main lecture by our guest, Professor Zhang Weiwei from the China Institute from Fudan University. And then that will be followed by a moderated panel discussion moderated by Dr. Philanim Mthembu from the Institute of Global Dialogue. And that moderated panel discussion will feature 4 speakers. The first speaker will be joining online from Russia, the Presidential Academy of Economics and Politics from Russia, Professor Andriy Margolin, who's the vice rector there at the Presidential Academy from Russia. That will be followed by Dr. Kifile Masiteng, thank you for coming, from the Office of the United Nations. And then it will also be followed by our guest from the Africa Peer Review Mechanism, Mr. Dalma Jama, who is also here with us. And then Professor Siphamandla Zondi will also be joining online as a panelist that will be moderated by Dr. Mthembu. That will be followed by discussion, colleagues. So please note down your questions and discussion point that you would like to raise. And then there will be closure, followed by lunch, and that's it. So with those few words, acting principal, may you please come to the stage and officially open this T20 symposium, the first on African soil. So it is quite very important, and also discussing a very important topic that is central to prosperity, the building of state capacity. Thank you very much, acting principal. Over to you.
Okay, thank you, Program Director. Good morning, everyone. Just to acknowledge everyone that is here, our distinguished guests, especially Prof. Weiwei. We're really pleased to have you in the room. Also, all those that are joining us online, we're privileged to have you participating in this T20 symposium with us. It is a really great pleasure to welcome you to this symposium, convened in the context of South Africa's G20 presidency. This is the very first presidency of the G20 to be held on African soil. We're deeply grateful for your participation and for insights you will bring to this important dialogue. This is not only a moment of continental pride, but also a moment of shared hope. The theme of South Africa's G20 presidency is solidarity, equity, and sustainability. It's grounded in our conviction that multilateralism remains the best path to address the challenges of our time. It reflects South Africa's long-standing commitment to solidarity with the Global South, to equity among nations in an inclusive system of global governance, and to sustainability as the foundation for common prosperity, the enjoyment of human rights, and peaceful coexistence. These principles are not abstract ideals. They are embedded in global and continental framework. South Africa's own National Development Plan 2030, the United Nations 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, and the African Union's Agenda 2063, which together shape the Africa and the world we seek to build. As part of its presidency, South Africa has placed emphasis on strengthening governance and institutions as essential enablers of development. This symposium, held under this theme, State Capacity and Institutional Transformation in Times of Complexity, exploring state capacity for agile public institution, reflects that priority. We are convinced that in an increasingly complex and uncertain world, agile, transparent, and effective public institutions are indispensable. Developmental states that are responsive to citizens and committed to shared prosperity can help achieve sustainable development and lasting peace. This stands in contrast to narrow and hegemonic approaches that pursue self-interest at the expense of the collective good. Inspired by the book, Why Do Nations Fail? Let us instead pose the question, why do nations succeed? I believe that successful nations are those that make strong investment in state capacity and embrace innovation. If the G20 is to succeed, it must place state capacity at the heart of sustainable development, which include building skills across state and society, harnessing the democratic divide, and also working in partnership with government and private sector and educational institutions so that we are aligned in making sure that labor market needs are inclusive for women, rural population, and marginalized groups. The G20 strength lies in fostering meaningful cooperation and driving a global skills revolution, which is essential for a fairer and more sustainable future. As we begin our discussions, let us approach them with humility and the spirit of collaboration. Let's shift our attention from challenges and place greater emphasis on exploring opportunities that drive forward the shared aspiration of humanity. The questions before us are complex, but through honest engagement and the collective wisdom gathered here, we can advance practical ideas that strengthen not only our states, but also the multilateral systems that bind us together. I wish you well in your deliberations. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Acting Principal, for those opening remarks, especially the line where you say, as we engage in discussions today, let us ask ourselves, why do nations succeed? And the world is faced with complexity, like you have said, and the topic of our symposium says. Complexity does not only present challenges, it also presents opportunities. So as we engage Prof. Zhang's lecture today, let us say, what are the opportunities that arise out of this complexity for the global South and for the entire world? Colleagues, I would like to call to the stage Prof. Zhang Weiwei to come and deliver the lecture for today. Prof. Zhang Weiwei, it's your time. Thank you.
So thank you very much. And Madame Pindo Mukawanazi and my old friend Busani, and all dear friends, comrades, and best greetings from Shanghai, from China. So my lecture today will be entitled State Capacity and Good Governance Defined by China, a Chinese perspective. I prepared a PPT, but I don't have a laptop with me here, so I will show to the coordinator next. So let's go to the next. Well, I said times of titanic change and complexity. So change first, because this change could be for good or bad. From Chinese point of view, it's on the whole more positive than negative. China would say it's a kind of decline of the West and the rise of the rest. A good example is the rise of the BRICS. If you look at the overall GDP, BRICS 11 members already represent 40% of the total GDP, while G7, 33%. So this is already different. And then let me quote something from Joseph Borrell, the former High Representative of Foreign Policy of EU. He said 2 years ago, in Latin America, in Africa, in the Middle East, in North Africa, and of course in Asia, almost everyone think now that there are credible alternatives to the West, not only economically, but also technologically, militarily, and ideologically. And I myself consider these 4 aspects: economy, technology, military, ideology are the four key pillars sustaining Western hegemony, sustaining unipolarity. But now, even EU top diplomat thinks these four pillars have been shaken. And then I will try to compare mainly China and United States, just these two countries, to see how these four pillars have been shaken and shaken completely. I just, I was thinking of whether Donald Trump finally will decide to come to the G20 or not. And just now, Busan told me his final decision not come. But again, to my mind, Donald Trump chose self-isolation. As a result, the United States will perhaps become more and more, or gradually and more irrelevant to the global majority. Just look at trade between China and Africa and trade between the United States and Africa. China's trade with Africa is already more than 4 times that of US trade with Africa. And very soon, perhaps in a few years, China's trade with South Africa will be equal to US trade with Africa, with South Africa alone. Yeah. So all these indications of tremendous change. The United States choose self-isolation. We cannot help it. Now, next, I will try to compare the 4 pillars, China, United States, as a sign of what has happened to the bilateral relations and national strengths. In terms of economic pillar, if you discuss the whole issue in terms of purchasing power parity with the latest World Bank data, by the end of 2023, China represents $35 trillion, United States, $27.4 trillion, India, $14.6 trillion, and Russia, $6.45 trillion. So in terms of PPP, of the top 4 countries, United States is number 2, and the other 3 are already larger than United States. Especially China's became a larger economy than US economy since 2014 by purchasing power parity. And China also represents the world's largest manufacturing power, industrial power, and trading power. And next, I went to Russia to attend this St. Petersburg Economic Forum. And Vladimir Putin made a statement. He started with China's economy is already much larger than the next power, which means the United States. He don't name it. They quote the figures I gave just now. And then he said China managed to create a very peculiar but rather efficient model of economic development, more efficient than in the United States. Next. So we discussed just now the overall GDP. Now let's look at something in per capita terms. Chinese consumption of protein and vegetables are also higher than the United States since 2021. This figure is something many people did not know. In other words, this is a remarkable progress in per capita terms. In terms of consumption of protein, China is 124.92 grams. United States, 124.20 some gram. So it's very minor ahead of the United States, but in per capita terms, it's a country of 1.4 billion people compared with another country of 350 million people. This is remarkable. In terms of vegetable consumption, China is 4 times larger. So this is all remarkable. Next. In terms of life expectancy, China also live longer. That's important. So beginning from the year 2020, the COVID occurred, China's average life expectancy began to be longer than the United States, up to now, same. Basically 1 year and a half to 2 years. So all these are, I describe as tremendous economic advancement and progress. Next, Now, United States launches trade war against China, and Donald Trump claimed he has a lot of cars. This cartoon shows a lot. And China leader said, all made in China. When the United States began its tariff war, when Donald Trump declared during the campaign, he said, I'm going to raise 60% tariff on Chinese goods. I got an interview with the American reporter. I said, ask your president to make it 600%. Because it's so simple. US economically depends far more on China than vice versa. Yeah, there are no other choices. If you lay this kind of tariffs, I'm sorry, US supermarkets will be half empty at least, if not more than half empty, not to mention other aspects of the relations. Now, technological pillar. Amazingly, The Economist carried 2 interesting articles in the span of 5 years. 5 years ago, it carried a cover article, Can China become a scientific superpower? It's a question mark, because in Economist view, China is an authoritarian country, no freedom of speech, so no freedom of thinking. As a result, it will be very difficult to become a superpower scientifically or technologically. But 5 years later, Economy carried another cover article. The title is China has become a scientific superpower. So this is amazing. You can read that particular report, which is interesting. And then if you look at this is a study by Australian Strategic Policy Institute, published last year, October 9, 2024. China leads the United States in 57 out of 64 critical technologies. This is extremely important. Yeah. The point is, only 15 years ago or 10 years ago, it's opposite. US leads China in 3/4 of the items of this critical technology. But now, China beats the United States in all these critical technologies. Now you can download this report. It's open source, so you can check. And then, of course, Huawei and DeepSeek, 2 companies representative of China's fast progress. Huawei has set up this important center in Johannesburg. We were there yesterday afternoon. They are doing a fantastic job. And I'll give you an example. Germany produced a report more than 10 years ago. It's called the German Industry 0.4, which is about smart economy, smart manufacturing, intelligent manufacturing. But in the end, this plan shattered, and no one mentioned this anymore. China, inspired by German plan, drafted its own Made in China 2025. It's done. Yeah. That's the result of so many EV cars, energy transition, etc. China has done. And one major reason is Germany followed the order of US administration, ban Huawei products, especially ban Huawei's 5G technologies, are very stupid. Without 5G technologies from Huawei, which is the best of the best in the world today, you cannot have smart economy. It's connecting on everything, So you cannot have this kind of smart economy, humanly impossible, at least up to today. So you have to use Huawei technology. So China beats US on that. That's important. DeepSeek is really an AI revolution because it's open sourced. For so many years, this Silicon Valley monopolized few, AI, whatever, as if United States has to control the whole AI monopoly and reach huge profits. But the founder of the DeepSeek in China said his idea is very socialist. He said we must make every village in China, in the world, can afford AI and AI revolution. So this is, in the end, very successful. It's widely used. Now, the United States feel a bit fearful of the competition from China in AI revolution. Now, military pillar. You may heard this remark made by US Secretary of Defense, Texas. He said that we must be very cautious with China because China's hypersonic missiles can destroy all US aircraft carriers in 20 minutes. In every war game played concerning Taiwan Strait by the Pentagon, the US loses to China. He frankly admitted all this several times. The latest is April 2025. Actually, I saw his video. That was November last year. From my information, I also made it open in China. It takes maybe 1 to 3 hours. Suppose all the US 10 aircraft carriers in South China Sea. So technically, we can destroy all of them within 1 hour also. Because this is a very simple reason. China has supersonic missiles, which United States do not have. Behind this is, again, a simple truth. United States economy industry has been hollowed out. To produce supersonic vehicles, whatever missiles, fighters, you need this what's called wind tunnels. For civilian flights, it's roughly 250 meters per second. But China's best wind tunnel can stand 10 kilometers per second. It's 40, 50 times of the flight speed of aircraft. United States don't have this technology. It will not have, because it has lost this industrial capability. And so without this, United States can only use the computer kind of, test it, which is not that reliable. So United States trying again through this physical test, but it will not work very well. Very soon, 3rd September, China will host a huge military parade. Many global South countries will come. Vladimir Putin will come. ASEAN leaders will come. It's a day to commemorate the victory of the war against Japanese aggression. China lost 35 million lives, but we resist war, defeated Japanese. So you will see the China's military, whatever, and progress defense industry. And then, not long ago, some of you may follow, there is an air clash, the largest scale in maybe post-war. Hundreds of, over 100 fighters from India tried to attack Pakistan. But Pakistan Air Force used the Chinese equipment and defeated India. Mainly, it's the AWACS system with a better radar system. And then we have this Chinese J-10 fighters. And then also this whole data system is linked, and missile, PLX missiles. As a result, when the Chinese radar AWACS discovered India rifle 4.5 generation advanced fighters made in France, but they were destroyed. In today's world, in modern warfare, discovery means destruction. So Chinese AWACS is 500 kilometers range, way ahead of the Indians, whatever they have purchased from France or United States. And don't forget, this equipment is something China exported to Pakistan. It's roughly 1 decade behind China's current equipment for the People's Liberation Army. So I always, said Chinese are humble people, and we have a culture of respecting others' faith. We don't humiliate others in public. And Chinese government is always very modest. But I tell American friends, I said, be very, very cautious. You cannot cross red lines with China. During the Cold War, Russia or Soviet Union and the United States did not fight a hot war. But China and the United States fought 2 hot wars, the Korean War in the 1950s and the Vietnam War in the 1960s and 1970s. We all know who lost 2 wars. And furthermore, I said, given China's defense capability, as your Secretary of Defense admitted, don't play fire with China. We still call you superpower. And I don't see that. And show decent respect. But if you provoke a war in South China Sea or over Taiwan Strait, I'm afraid, we hope that will never happen. But if it really happens, I think the United States will no longer be a superpower in the eyes of international community. I say this with certainty. Actually, U.S. is very cautious. Whenever China hold military exercise surrounding Taiwan, 5 times already, U.S. Navy force aircraft carriers always stay away, 2,000 kilometers away. So United States military knows it's a problem. Now we'll come to state capacity, because all these Chinese achievements vis-a-vis United States, behind this is state capacity. Very important. Then before we discuss state capacity, we have to discuss a bit how to define democracy. Unfortunately, in the world today, democracy is more or less defined by West. More or less, sometimes say registered first by the Americans, by the Europeans. So democracy means procedural democracy, means the election, one person, one vote, multi-party system. Chinese said, no, this is not good. Chinese philosophy is Dao and Shu. Dao means overall purpose. Shu means procedures. So procedural democracy is Shu. Above that is Dao. What purpose you serve? So China divide democracy into procedure and substantive. We focus on substantive and then try to produce a system, institutions of democracy in line of China's national conditions. So I put this argument many, many years ago. I said there should be a paradigm shift from the Cold War talk of democracy versus autocracy to good governance versus bad governance, defined by the country and the people of that particular country. And also it's crucial, it's a problem with many countries adopting Western model of democracy, how to break this election populism cycles. Every 4 years, every 5 years, there's no way to make long-term planning and have them executed. This is also challenging for many African countries. And, from a Chinese point of view, for instance, I'll tell you a simple example. Now everyone knows China is the leader in EVs, electric cars. But this is the result of 4 5-year plans, 20 years, continuous effort. So we can ask a simple question, can the Western model deliver that kind of long-term commitment and long-termism? Always short-term. Same with the Green Deal, energy transition, carbon peak. China has done, it's the European project, started with all kinds of fanfare, but with the Ukrainian crisis, it shattered. But China put this into 5-year plan, have them executed one after another. It's done. And since last year, technically, China already reached the objective of carbon peak. But the government still did not announce this because only 1.6% reduction over the year before, over the peak. So Chinese government think maybe this year it will be different. So let's wait for another 1 or 2 years. Our objective is by the year 2030, we'll reach carbon peak. By year 2060, we'll reach carbon neutrality. Now, China produced plan cautiously, scientifically, so to speak, but we try to implement them with vigor and then let the results show. Furthermore, in the Chinese model, what's emphasized is you should ensure a balance of political power, social power, and economic power in favor of most people. That's important because the Western political jargon is about division of labor, division of power, separation of power, administrative, judicial, and so this is 3 branches in the political domain. But for really good society to operate, you should have beyond these three domains, beyond these three branches of the government, and then moving to this overall balance between political power, social power, and economic power in favor of most people. Otherwise, like the United States, it's dominance of the capital power for the benefit of the few. And I'll discuss a bit the state capacity in the case of China. It's a capacity of a civilizational state. What does it mean? Because the rise of China is the rise of civilizational state. That is amalgam of the world's longest continuous civilization and super large modern state, modern socialist state. With this key feature I call four supers and one blend, which means both ancient and modern blended together in terms of state capacity. So I will discuss briefly four supers. Super large population. It's historical inheritance. It's always the world's largest, most populous country. But this population is well educated. Every year, we produce more engineers, scientists than the Western countries combined. So this is ancient and modern. Super vast territory. It's a continent. You fly for 6 hours, you're still within China. But this huge landmass is connected with world's best. What's more important, the digital infrastructure. I can say with certainty, if you go to so-called backwaters in China, there's still some regions which are relatively more backward, say Tibet or Xinjiang. But still, if you go there, go to villages, their Wi-Fi, their internet connection are better than the center downtown Paris or Berlin. I was there. 4G, 5G, fully covered, 90% village. So this is a typical case of what I call mixed economy. I'll come to that, yeah. And then super long traditions with modern adaptation. This is very important. This is also my advice to our African friends. We have to draw a lot from our own national conditions. And for instance, the West usually have 3 terms as number one of Chinese province. Given the size of China, literally have governed over 100 million people before they come to the current position. So you need a qualification to become a leader. You have good performance and record before you can become a top leader. So selection first and then election. Selection from Chinese tradition, but China invented the Keju system, which means civil servant examination system. As elections from the West, and we try to combine the both, and that has worked. Super rich cultures. In terms of political culture, we have a very strong Confucian tradition, a tradition from philosopher Confucius. And his main philosophy for political governance is people's livelihood first, which means whatever you do, political policy, economic policy, social policy, whatever other policies, they must all boil down to one thing: improving people's life in one way or another. It could be material life, could be spiritual life, could be everything, but it has to be really down to earth. And in the end, manifested in tangible things for the people. So this philosophy has been consistent. It's cultural. And then, in the 1980s, when I was interpreter working for Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping, there was a debate in China. But Chinese government did not say anything about it. It's entirely academic between different think tanks. They try to summarize the success of modernization and economies. And they came to a humble conclusion. It's very easy to summarize with slight exaggeration. It's called hard state, hard economy. The case is Soviet Union, which means centralized government, or some people say dictatorship, whatever, and centrally planned economy. Rigid. It's successful to different degrees because Russia, Soviet Union became a superpower on the power of the United States. But in the end, you find it's less and less competitive. So when Soviet Union broke up, there are also domestic reasons. The economy could not compete with the West. Yeah. Then hard state and soft economy. Centralized state, but economy is more market-oriented. It's the Asia's little dragons. South Korea, Singapore, and Chinese Taiwan, and Chinese Hong Kong. At that time, they were also ruled under, you may call strong leader or British colony, whatever. So this is relatively successful. State is slightly strong, and economy is market-oriented. And then soft state and hard economy. The case of India before its reform started. The state is a multi-party system, very weak, cannot make hard decisions. And economy is very hard, centralized, planned. And India, of course, did not do very well during those decades. That's why India began its own reform. And then soft state and soft economy, that's a Western model. It's democracy, liberal democracy. State is relatively soft, and then economy is more market-oriented. Of these idealized 4 types, but sometimes for analysis, this ideal type is useful. Of course, today, China has moved way beyond this stage, and China model is much more sophisticated now and performing better than other models. Now, state capacity the Chinese way. Political domain, Chinese Communist Party or Communist Party of China is a holistic interest party. This is very important, holistic interest party. All Western-style political parties are what I call partisan parties or partisan interest parties or partial interest parties. And China has this tradition of holistic interest party. It's not something created by the Chinese Communist Party, because China was first unified in 221 BC. So over 2,000 years ago, it's unified. Since then, most of the time, China was a unified country. And for this unified country, the system is always unified ruling entity. You may call one-party system. Because civilization state, you put it another way, is amalgamation of hundreds of states into one over its long history. This regional diversity, this ethnic diversity, cultural diversity, everything was there, in hundreds of states, but it's moving to one in the 3rd century BC. So for this kind of country, it's ruled by unified ruling entity. And CPC is the continuation and evolution of that tradition. It had to be a unified ruling entity, otherwise the country broke up. China tried the American model in the 1911, what we call the Republican Revolution. The Chinese government at that called Republic of China, that copied the Americans. Then the country degenerated into warlords fighting each other. Yeah, so China drew a heavy lesson from that. Now, with a holistic interest party, you can shape national consensus. You can carry out reforms. You can conduct long-term planning, and you can have them executed. It's so important, yeah. For this kind of country, 1.4 billion people, most Chinese can't imagine we adopt the Western political model and change the central government every 4 or 5 years. It's just unimaginable. I said the Chinese system works much better than the Western system. I said this a long time ago, So, in the economic domain, it's mixed economy. Private sector, state sector complement each other in the ideal situation. I gave you the example of how Chinese internet revolution, now surpassing most Western countries, had to do with this. The state sector is responsible for building infrastructure, first rate, and even it's the political task. You have to build 4G or 5G stations in every village. If there are human beings, you have to build a village. Even in the mountainous area, you have to do it, whatever cost. Yeah. Then, according to Xi Jinping, supply also produce output. Yeah. When everything's there, supply there, then TikTok, Douyin, and many e-commerce. China has the world's most dynamic e-commerce market. And then social domain, it's the positive interaction between state and society. Chinese government and CPC are much more responsive to social issues in China than Western government or parties to Western society's demand. No difference, no comparison. Yeah, I'll give you an example. On the same day, the United States had this Los Angeles on fire. 10,000 houses were burned as if nothing has happened. Almost on the same hour, in China, Tibet, about 4,000 meters high in the mountainous, a village, a town, was hit by an earthquake. In 10 minutes, AI-controlled drones already began to testing and examine the situation. In 1 hour, PLA's helicopters arrived in the earthquake structure. Within the same day, electricity restored, power restored, food restored. No comparison, so much better, The US way of rescuing is almost a joke by Chinese standards. The leadership is so incompetent, And then in the technological domain, that's the latest research I've done. I've no time to explain to you. I call the why China made so much progress in technologies in the last decade. It's accumulation, evolution of the long-term commitment, but past decade important. Yeah. And I call it saturation and precision model or approach. Saturation means we have more engineers than Western countries combined. We made a calculation. Every year, any moment in China, say today, in average, 7.2 million scientists, engineers working R&D, solving all kinds of problems. Yeah, this is the size of 4.5 times the size of the United States. That's how we make progress. If you talk to Huawei, they will tell you, you have technical problems, we send 1,000 engineers. It cannot be resolved, 10,000 engineers, and it will be resolved. Yeah. So what we do is, as a civilizational state, the size matters. China is the only country, arguably, capable of testing simultaneously all technological routes or paths. For instance, for the EVs, we have lithium battery, we have hydrogen, we have ethanol, and other approaches, all being tested in large scale. Yeah, but we have evaluation system. See, every half a year, every year, we try to see which route is performing better. In the end, we find, lithium battery is by far the best. Then precision, resources, human, financial, other capital, channel into this particular route. Even today, despite our tremendous progress in lithium battery, we're also very strong in hydrogen and ethanol, etc., other routes. So simultaneous, but there is a precision. We know which route is more appropriate for general use vehicles, which route for other vehicles. Just an example. So this model is something I think the United States will have trouble with. Now, finally, possible relevance for Africa. Really, it's my own ideas. I've been to 18 African countries and know a bit about Africa, but not very well. So I'm always try to study the real Africa whenever I come to Africa, try to know as much as possible to make sure that our study can be slightly relevant for Africa. The key philosophy of China's success is the famous line from Chairman Mao. It's called seeking truth from facts, not from dogmas. If you follow Chinese Marxism is about, especially learning style, urban uprising. Mao said at that time, we did not have many working class people, but we have a lot of peasants. Yet he said peasants can be revolutionary. He made an analysis. So this is one way to seek truth from facts. And he was, in the end, convincing enough. So seeking truth from facts, same with reform of Deng Xiaoping, same principle. Don't believe any dogma from the East or from the West. Seek truth from reality and to see what can benefit your own country, your people. And second is exploring one's own national conditions and making best use of one's civilization and cultural resources. I was reading a South African scholar's article on what you call the Ubuntu spirit, culture tradition from this part of the African region and actually even beyond South Africa. I think this kind of cultural roots is important. Only something from indigenous roots can really work. This is a very important part of China's success. So Xi Jinping now talks about the combination of Marxism with Chinese cultural traditions. And if Marxism is synthesized Chinese style. Yeah. So this is very important. Otherwise, it's always foreign. It cannot really working that well. And number three, shaping national visions that transcend election cycles and breaking this election populism cycles. This is a problem with many countries adopting Western political systems, including many in Africa. I was thinking, is there any possibility, because obviously to fight poverty, to achieve a reasonable amount of modernization, you have to have projects beyond 5 years. Otherwise, you cannot do it. Yeah. So this is so basic. That's why, Western model, 20 years ago, I came with this humble conclusion. I said openly and wrote openly. I said, if a non-Western country or non-Western society adopting Western political model, it will end up in two scenarios. One is from euphoria to despair. One is from euphoria to anarchy. Yeah. From euphoria to despair, very often are cases of like Chinese Taiwan or other, which means under their own, whatever model you call authoritarian model, strong state model, they achieved a certain degree of modernization. And then they adopt American model, then stagnating. And then people quarrel with each other, and the economy fail. Yeah. And for those without this basic modernization, if they adopt this Western political model, chaotic. Yeah. So sometimes I'm thinking of whether we could find the cases where, I said, for Taiwan, we are confident, after unification, Taiwan should adopt political reform, substantial reforms, so they help to move out of Western model. Yeah. For other countries, can we do that? And when possible, in China, we should jostle an approach that we start something. So I was reading this African Union's plan for Africa 2063. That's a long-term planning. But this idea is good. I just think whether, for instance, for South Africa, for, say, neighboring countries, we produce a vision 2050. I was in Russia 2 months ago. Russia was producing a plan for Russia 2050. Yeah, but this plan must be, a really extremely deep level of consultation with all the interested parties and peoples, and with all the experts' inputs. Once this plan is adopted by Parliament, it should become something ingrained into national culture and institutions. All civil servants must know this and loyal to this. All political parties, whoever in power, must continue to explain. The plan could be more, say, less ambitious, say, vision for 2050, fighting poverty or reducing certain a gap, whatever, or for AI development. Anyway, something tangible as pilot projects. And then in the end, it can go beyond these election cycles. Otherwise, it will be difficult, unless you think political system has nothing to do with development, with economic development. I think most Chinese cannot accept that. If the government cannot deliver tangible results for the people, why we need this kind of system or government? And then Chinese experience is conducting pilot projects. Whatever new policy we are going to pursue, always pilot projects. Test first. If the results are good, we extend it elsewhere. If not good, we stop it. And finally, I think we should promote African regional cooperation, integration in the direction of building civilizational community. From my own theory of civilizational state, there is one element which is very basic. Size matters. If it's only confined to relatively small countries, Africa, most countries are relatively small, very small. Same with Europe. In Europe, people say, they're only small countries, or those who don't know they are small countries, but they are small countries. So we need a certain degree of integration. So the size will matter a lot. For instance, a very simple reason is internet industry. It always had to do with size. Why European or EU does not have its own internet economy as strong as China, United States? If you look at the top 20 internet companies, they are half American, half Chinese, because the language is not unified. So I'm thinking of to what extent, at least regional integration, and if there is a cultural and civilizational head, that will help a lot. I know the very term English civilization has certain not necessarily positive meaning, yet I think the idea is we need something overall, a kind of head, a cultural thing, so that people can share a lot. In Asia, for China cooperating with ASEAN, we have a civilizational dialogue. We talk about Asian wisdom. People from Asia have strategic patience, and 2 steps forward, 1 step backward, negotiations, 5 principles of peaceful existence. So these are all important. And I think that's all I want to discuss with you here. And thank you very much. And last one is, many thanks. Thank you.
Sure.
I'll sit here.
Please sit here. Thank you very much, Prof. Zhang Weiwei, for that insightful presentation. I'm going to ask Dr. Planim Tembu, Dr. Kifili Masiteng, and our colleague from the Mr. Jama from the Africa Peer Review Mechanism to make their way to the front for the moderated panel discussion. There are quite a few things that I picked up from Prof. Zhang Weiwei's presentation, but I'm not going to go into detail regarding them. I think that the moderator of the panel will do that. But drawing from what the acting principal said during the opening remarks was that we should ask ourselves, why do nations succeed and not necessarily why do nations fail? And I think that from that presentation from Prof. Zhang Weiwei, we have seen why China succeeds. And something crossed my mind because we speak about why do nations succeed or why do nations fail. But I think that is there's a pre-assumption that all countries are nations. There's an assumption that there's a nation. So for nations to succeed also, there should be nation building. That's why in South Africa, our constitution calls on us to unite the people of South Africa into one nation. So colonialism has disrupted many nations across the world. So as part of why countries must succeed, part of it is nation building, and also state formation is very important. And one thing also that I've picked up from this presentation, we know that these days we speak about the new production factors away from the traditional ones, which was land, labor, and capital. The new production factors now also include the issues of technology and artificial intelligence. And I think from that presentation, what I pick is that China succeeds because it innovates. So maybe one bold statement we can make is that those who do not innovate then fail. And I think innovation is the backbone of a country's development, because with innovation, then you can optimize limited resources and upscale your impact. So, Dr. Pilane Mthembu, I'd like to hand over to you to moderate this panel discussion. We have two colleagues that have joined us online. One is from the Russia's Presidential Academy of Politics and Economics. That will be the first one to go. Then I'd like to call upon you, Dr. Mthembu, to facilitate the panel. And the last speaker on the panel will be Professor Siphamandla Zondi from the University of Johannesburg, who will also be joining online. Dr. Mthembu, over to you. I don't know if those microphones do work. If they do not work, I think the panelists will just have to make their way here, or they do work, so they can speak from there.
I think we can say, no, colleagues, thank you very much for that. I think, thank you again to Professor Waiwe, because this was really, I think, gave us a lot of food for thought. You know, I think often at times when you engage with various stakeholders, I think they often say, or they may want to say, yes, Africa may be attracted, right, by the advancements that China has made, rapid advancements over the last few decades. But what we also find sometimes is that there's always at times the cautionary tale to say, but China is a very unique country, unique political system, unique in terms of its culture, in terms of its civilizational state. But I think, you know, starting with what the last slide that Professor touched on, you know, lessons, I think, for Africa. What I pick up is that it's not about saying that Africa needs to copy China. Instead, the message that I'm taking is that actually Africa needs to go within itself, understand its own complexities, its own cultures, its own traditions, and form political systems that are able to advance the interests of African people. Because I think if there's one thing we can learn from China, is that it has actually, it's drawn on its own traditions, its own cultures, its political practices. However, it has also innovated, it has also taken lessons from other parts of the world, but incorporated it within its own political system. There is ownership of the political process, of the economy, when we look at China. And I think the message that I take from Professor is that in the African context, there also has to be ownership of your own development model, your own political systems, if you are to succeed. So with that, colleagues, let me invite our four speakers who will essentially give responses to what we have heard this morning, but also introduce new ideas into the discussion. Our first speaker is online, and I hope they connected properly. It is Professor Andrei Margolin, who is Vice Rector at the Russian Presidential Academy of National Economy and Public Administration. Each speaker will be given 10 minutes. I will try to be equal in terms of my moderation. And so when each is sort of approaching that, I will try to give an indication without necessarily disrupting your speaking too much. So Professor Magudin, the floor is yours for the next 10 minutes.
Thank you so much, dear colleagues. First of all, let me thank the organizers for inviting me to participate in today's conference and say a few words about transforming the role of leaders in the face of global uncertainty. I use the 10 minutes which you give me. The modern world is going through a time of global flux. Sweeping change in taking place in the nature of interaction between countries and corporations. And competition is intensifying in almost all fields of activity: politics, economics, education, culture, sports. Leadership and professional competence requirements, as well as the ability of anticipate and avert the onset of crisis, are increasing manifold in this context. This is exactly the topic I wanted to address in my presentation today. On the first slide, I would like to note that management theory is developing very dynamically and has come a long way from so-called task management, which implies strict control over the execution of tasks by the higher up, to goal management, which distillation in the use of key performance indicator of both structural divisions of an organization and individual employees. The goal management system is usually implemented in the project management format, when the performer is given the goal that he is supposed to achieve using personal abilities and company resources. Despite the obvious advantages of using key performance indicators, numerous studies go to show that they have various and quite significant disadvantages as well. These include lack of consideration for the individual character traits of employees, excessive formalism, a lack of flexibility, and emphasis on individual achievements, all too often to the detriment of teamwork and others. That is exactly why the value management has become increasingly popular recently, under which the general rules apply, following which the organization achieves its goal with regard to its social and environmental responsibility. This is where the new role of leaders emerges, signs the essential prerequisite for the introduction of values management in the siege of fielding of leaders on the meritocracy principle. As is known, the essence of meritocracy is that the most capable people should occupy senior management positions regardless of their social background, connections, and financial resources. It is believed that the idea of meritocracy belongs to British sociologist Michael Young, who formulated the definition in 1958. But even earlier, in the 3rd century BC, the Chancellor of Kingdom of Qin in China, Louis Bouvet, wrote, "When nominating a person for any position, one should look firstly at his character, secondly at his abilities, and thirdly at his diligence." Nonetheless, as numerous studies show, the implementation of the principle of meritocracy is fraught with very significant risks, among which special attention should be paid to conservation or even strengthening of social and economic inequality, subjective assessment of abilities and merits, focus on personal success at the expense of team achievements, lack of a culture partnership, encouraging reports of achievements often imaginary. Nevertheless, knowing about the risks of the meritocracy principle and minimizing them in real life, we can still find and promote new types of leader possessing the necessary professional competencies to achieve the goals of sustainable development in the face of global uncertainty. One might wonder What is the new in raising the issue of achieving the Sustainable Development Goals? I think that the answer to this question is connected with a certain perceptual change about the relationships between the notions of sustainable development and ESG, as well as with a meaningful interpretation of the relationship between gaining real sovereignty and achieving the goals of sustainable development. The 17 Sustainable Development Goals are widely known, and in my presentation, I'd like to highlight the following. These goals differ so much that any efforts to develop universal mechanisms of achieving them are an impossibility. For instance, the significance of such goals as reducing inequality, number 10, and preserving terrestrial ecosystems, number 15, is beyond doubt, but methods to achieve them will be very different. The question arises, what do these goals have in common? Our answer is the logic of ESG transformation of public and corporate governance systems. In fact, this transformation, and we together with Nobel Prize laureate Rae Kwon-chung from South Korea had a go at reading about it, consists of two so-called traits of sustainable development. First, considering environmental, social, and economic issues in a package. And second, coordinating the long-term interests of the state, business, and civil society. From our point of view, these common approaches can be considered as the foundation of a unified approach to achieving all the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And it's them that have never been so more relevant than today in the context of the global uncertainty. So, which are the professional competencies that modern leaders should have that would comply with the principle of meritocracy and be able to achieve sustainable development goals in our not so easy times? It seems that note should be made of three key groups of these competencies. First, availability of the necessary administrative powers and effective management skills. Here it is important to depart from the all too familiar authoritarian management and excessive administration to meritocracy, human centricity, and to building effective managerial teams. Indeed, excessive administration has become a true scourge of our time. It is for good reason that George El Ghazi, former president of the European Committee and Economic Cultural Cooperation, said, part of any administrative machine serves absolutely no purpose. It is beauty in its purest form. Moral authority. It is possessed by someone who is immune to the cult of maximizing current personal gain, but instead is committed to values and ethics based on the foundation on an atmosphere of trust and fair play in the team. It is impossible to imagine a modern leader in condition of global uncertainty, especially one who does not have professional authority. Its key elements are strategic thinking and disciplinary knowledge. Here is characterized by a focus on striking and balance between short-term goals and long-term priorities, implying the need to solve economic, social, and environmental problems in a package. Crisis management skills, allowing not so much to deal with the negative consequences of crisis as to be able to spot and solve complex problems even before they transform into emergency situations. Optimal resources management, the essence of which is so move from wasting resources to their conservation, to greater efficiency, and most importantly, to responsibility for inaction. It is precisely in the context of uncertainty that need arises to act professionally, decisively, and fast enough, which is a guarantee of equality adaptation to the constant changes of the world around us. Skills of working in the digital environment and using artificial intelligence. In this case, it is not man versus artificial intelligence. Just the opposite. The development of artificial intelligence holds natural intelligence to a higher standard, while the future belongs to the synergy of artificial and natural intelligence. The presence of the above set of professional competencies of modern leaders, one of the key conditions for gaining real sovereignty by a country in which such leaders appear in state, business, and civil society. The last slide shows that the concept of sovereignty is complex and is far from limited to the military political component, but also has economic, financial, personal, cultural, and informational dimensions. From this, it follows that in the face of global uncertainty, modern leaders are held to a very high standard. The competitiveness and sustainable development of the countries they represent a function in the synthesis of their managerial skills, moral and professional authority. If historical experience is anything to draw upon, no sanctions can stand in the way of such development. The Russian experience proves it. In conclusion, I would like to note that our Presidential Academy takes great interest in the best practices of other countries in the field of training modern leaders, and we are always open to cooperation in this and other professional fields. Thank you for your attention.
No, excellent. Thank you very much, Professor Margolin. And I think the changing dynamics of leadership, but also in a changing world, certainly, I think that's well highlighted. But also, I think some of the challenges that you mentioned, even around the way in which certain goals like the SDGs are designed, and therefore, at times, some of the challenges in terms of achieving that. So thank you very much for that. Our next speaker is Dr. Kifilwe Masiteng, who is the head of the Resident Coordinator's Office at the United Nations.
Thank you very much, moderator. Thank you very much, Prof, for the starting of this process that we are currently in. I just want to start from the process of this issue of complexity. I think it should have been understood that the complexity is going to be part of our lives, and it can also be seen as something that should be able to provide what one would call opportunities more than make us always get scared. There is an evolution of development, and when development evolves, there's going to be changes. It was never going to be a developmental state or environment or wealth, which is going to be static. So the understanding of the current environment that is marked by many aspects of volatility, there's a lot of uncertainty, there's a lot of complexity that we talk about, and then there's a lot of ambiguity in dealing with the things that we're trying to understand. And yes, those that want and always want to define things will call it a VUCA world. And if we want to sustain and be resilient, we should start to allow ourselves to live in the VUCA world. But the created part that we can do for ourselves is start by adapting to it, is to start by starting to understand it. But also, I think the issue of long-term planning would mean is starting to move ahead of the VUCA world, knowing that it is here. Some of the critical issues that we would have thought would happen are not going to happen as we would like them to, but they are going to be dependent on what is created by the world itself. I want to start by the issues of SDGs, Africa Agenda 2063, and the National Development Plan of the country. If you look at the three, they are all interlined. It is about interconnectedness. It is about the critical issues of having the better lives for the people. And all of them are about the people, the future of the people that is better than it was yesterday. And maybe at the end of the day, in the very VUCA world, we can say tomorrow should be yesterday better than today, so that we can also look at the future that is more better and planned. But we also want to explore this issue of the building of a capable state. And I want us to talk of the issues that are seen in the state. And as Prof says, the states differ. And I also always feel the decisiveness of any state determines the future of that state. The example about China that took a decision that even if we are looking at people buying the German cars 50 years ago, the decision when it was taken was we will stick to our cars. But today we're starting to see a change. And it is true, it was taken 50 years ago, that decision. And some of the critical issues that we also need to understand is dealing with poverty, inequality, building the critical issues of the state, as well as building an economy, long-term projects. And if there's anything that I would like to leave here is long-term planning is the way to go in the VUCA world. If we understand taking decisions today about the future, the critical issues that we should be able to think of is be deliberate to understand that there are multiple actors in the world, in the country, sovereignty even of South Africa or China or Japan or any other country is built based on multiple players. The certain issues around what would be the role of the private sector against or versus, or maybe in complementarity with the state, is that the state is not going to build the country alone. And it is the critical issue of what is it that the state can do, but what is it that the private sector can do better than the state? And if we could be decisive as a country and say we do not have the same skills in the private sector, in civil society, in academia, as well as in government, and therefore all the partners of social development play their roles in complementarity and not in competition, you will find the private sector that built the country on bigger issues like infrastructure. And then you will find the state that will channel the resources on human capital. You'll build human capital. You'll make sure that services are there for them. So it is about those critical issues of also understanding that while we could have understood our roles, there are also going to be issues of rapidly changing issues. Climate change, I think we talked about it as if it was science before. But now climate change is here. We need to adapt. We need to mitigate. We need to be able to start to be ahead of it and be able to be predictive. So those are the critical issues. And we should also accept that not everything is going to be linear. It's not that everything we plan today that we want to reduce poverty by 25% by 2030 is going to move linear. And then even when you are starting to see the wheels that are turning towards a positive achievement, things change, and then there is disaster in the country. Things change, people have to be moved from where they used to stay, and they are affected by climate change. While we try to deal with climate change, we also start to deal with critical issue of corruption in our own countries. While you think you understand corruption, you start to deal with the state that is starting to lose the people that used to be having skills. So it continues changing. It is not going to be linear, but building the capability in a state needs to be decisiveness also, making sure that there are those people that have analytical capability, not only in the state is a country. So analytical capability should be built across different industries, including strengthening it in the state or in government. That analytical capability should be able to assist people to deal with issues like data systems, being evidence-based in terms of the decisions that are made. Always being able to understand, if we understand the population dynamics, that is where the success of development of the country would be. If we understand how many people are in a country, how they are profiled, understanding their skills, understanding the environment under which they live, that determines what the future would be. Therefore, other skills that we should have is long-term planning, very decisive, but scenario planning and foresighting is very important. When we are able to apply these types of dealing with data, do foresighting, at first we thought scenario planning is just writing the South Africa we want. And then we give them names like Skedonk and that. It's no longer as a joke as it used to be. Those are the only skills that can make us sit and decisively think about the future of the country. So those are critical things that I think that we need to be able to look into, but also the ability to be operationally strong as a country. And I'm not talking about government. I'm talking about the state. I'm talking about the government that works with civil society, that works with private sector and the academia. And in many of these discussions, I always see that the academia are left to be the last partner, the last stakeholder we talk about. One day, maybe we should put the academia as the first, so that the creation of ideas, the creation of the thinking should start with the academia and start to be inculcated. When the theories change, we should be able to get them from the academia. But more importantly, I think we should be able to get a strengthening of public sector capabilities decisively. And maybe it's because we have NSG. The role of NSG should not be the only one that does that, but everybody should be able to play their role. And we should also have critical issues around the political issues of our countries. If we understand that there is going to be a change in the political landscape, it is changing in our face. We're seeing ourselves moving into coalitions. There was a time that maybe we thought we could be able to deal with it, but some people who had foresight and scenario planning saw it. Some people knew that this country would be going into coalitions, while those that might have had self-interest kept on saying, no, it's not going to happen. It's happening today. What needs to happen is for the country that starts to say, with the coalitions, with the population that we have, with the livelihoods of the people that we have in this country, what needs to be done? And that can be the people that work within and with the political sectors that we have. We need to behave to have political people that are able to be also dealing with these numbers, being able to deal with this information in a manner that the decision that the politicians make is informed. So that the politicians, thank you. So that the politicians are also a sector. I don't know how to call it. When we sit, there should be politicians, economists, social transforming, academics, and politicians. And they become part of the sector that speaks, maybe after the academia or before the academia, but there should be a sector or they should be a stakeholder. So when we sit like this, we should also have them in the room. At the end of the day and at the heart of it, everybody should be talking about the lives of the people. In the UN, we say for the people, for the planet, for peace, for prosperity. When we come and set these issues about better economy, it's about prosperity. When we talk about safety and security, it's about for the peace, for the people. And all these issues should be discussed with everybody in the room. But more importantly, I think we should have the critical issue that says we should accept that there are things that the country is strong at. And if the country is able to analyze and see what it is strong at, use those to build the development agenda of the country. China has chosen two critical issues. We are many, we are a big country, we are a big economy, and they are using it. We are not going to depend on others. And one thing I will end up with, Prof, is that South Africa doesn't want to be China. I always say it. But there is so much that South Africa can learn from China with the strength of critical things that South Africa has. On its, we call it a challenge where you don't know what you have and you continuously give it away for others to do it and bring it to you. South Africa does not consume what it produces. And it does not produce what it consumes until South Africa starts to ensure that what leaves South Africa is what has been produced in South Africa and given out to be able to build the economy of South Africa. That would mean we will not take out this unskilled labor. It will be the unskilled of this country to deal with the raw materials in this country. When we invest in the people that are in this country, then we build the economy, then we will be a better population. And yes, for the people and for the planet, for South Africa, only South Africans can do it for themselves. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. I think complexity, understanding complexity, that's definitely very important, but also the decisiveness of the state, because I think, as you highlight, and as we, sort of demonstrated through the China example, one can have great theories, great analysis, but without a decisive state and without the political will to actually advance, ideas and implement ideas, then then it's basically ideas and without benefiting the people. So I think this is very important in terms of developing the capability, developing the skills, the analytical capability, and understanding complexity, but also decisiveness and the political will to implement. That is very important. Our next speaker, colleagues, is Mr. Dalma Jama, who's the head of strategic planning at the African Peer Review Mechanism.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Really, it's been an eye-opener for me today. I really want to thank our guest speaker. A lot of real knowledge, and also I would say a lot of ideas that complement some of our own at the African Union. So it's almost a meeting of the minds, so to speak. So I really do feel that very honored to be here. My name is Dalmar Jama. I work at the African Union, specifically at the African Peer Review Mechanism. The African Peer Review Mechanism is our governance workshop. So we do work on good governance in about 6 or 7. In fact, now we have a new number 6 and 7, 2 new thematic areas. So governance in democracy and political government, governance in economic governance and management, corporate governance, social science, where we're working with our member states, looking at their capacity to deliver, especially when there are complex environments, whether medical, emergencies such as COVID, or others such as drought, wildfires, floods, etc. How can our member states deliver to its citizens? So those are some of the ideas we have. And the newest and latest is e-governance, where we are trying to use the power of this new AI, the software to bring us together and to deliver services, as many of our member states are doing. So that in a nutshell is what the APRM does. We've completed, I would say, about 38 or so governance reviews across the continent in all the thematic areas, as well as specific thematic areas. Some member states come to us and say, Namibia said, we want to talk about youth unemployment. So we sit with them, we bring in experts from across the continent to work with them on delivering some solutions, some recommendations on youth unemployment. Zambia has asked us about tourism management. Some have asked us about mineral resource utilization. We have a huge mining sector on our continent. So we do all of these on behalf of our member states. And some of the ideas that a guest speaker, as well as our colleagues have discussed from UNDP, etc., are ideas that make sense and that I'd like to a little bit bring our APRM, the African Union, perspective on where we are going as a union, and not least the regional integration perspective, which our keynote speaker mentioned. The fact that really, in order to have economies of scale, in order to make use of the rich, I would say, expertise that we have across the continent, it makes sense to work together. So that, I think, is the underlying logic behind the African Peer Review Mechanism. Excuse me 1 minute. So this morning, I want to just a little bit talk about our state resilience program. as I mentioned, it started after the COVID crisis. We've completed several governance reviews, including for South Africa. We had a state resilience component post-COVID where we did a review. Togo, we did on urban resilience, especially in Lome, its capital city. And in Mozambique, we looked at resilience as well as a targeted review. And I would just want to, because I know in a setting such as this, I don't want to inundate you with information. What I want you to do is just take a little bit of some of our key findings and also where it resonates with what the guest speaker as well as some of my colleagues have said. And I think if we can have a meeting of the minds on those key points, I think it would have been a morning well spent. So one of the findings is our member states have really good planning, coordination, institutional frameworks, but there is, I would say where we have found some inadequacy is with respect to operational capacity, accountability. And that's when our keynote speaker talked about implementation with vigor. That is key. Because what we end up having on our continent, and my colleague from UNDP will mention, we have a lot of beautiful studies, but to implement our plans and across electoral mandates, because every new person who comes in charge will say they knew nothing, and they will start all over again. And even at APRM, we have found that our APRM reviews, if it occurs across a review, the new head will no longer care about what the old head was doing with us. So it becomes a matter of futility and a lot of energy utilized without any end result. So that's one of the key I would like to put on the table is we have good planning, but execution is very weak. And this, we're not trying to criticize, we are self-criticizing because that's what APRM is about. We ask our member states to do self-assessment. So that's one. And then the second one is very closely related to that first point, political turnover in leadership, as well as continuity of policy, negatively affects our policy planning and implementation. That I think we can all agree on. Thirdly, we have a problem with decentralization. So if you were listening to our guest speaker, he discussed, and I know I've read about it, where political leadership starts at the village level, and as they prove themselves, a leader will slowly rise to the national level. As a result, they will not have lost some of that understanding of the needs of the grassroots. I would say in many of our member states, governance structures from local to national and regional levels are not really working together, and they are confronted with high levels of complex situations that they are confronted with alone, whether natural hazards such as droughts, wildfires, storms, sinkholes, floods, disease outbreaks. There's not enough coordination between the center and the grassroots. So another key area is that we need to invest much more in capacity and resilience to build that capable states. We need to implement innovative, and this is a third point, funding mechanisms at all levels. How are we going to fund it? And I know my colleague mentioned how we need to work with the private sector more. That's another key area, and Professor Margolin also mentioned it. He discussed the need to, I wrote it down, goal management, but also work more closely with the private sector in public-private partnerships, because the result will be more financing and forecasting, working with the private sector in investing at the grassroots and beyond. I think those are the key messages. The use of e-governance and digital platforms is limited. More governments need to invest in digital tools and risk management systems. We need more intersectoral collaboration and resource management. We need a more holistic approach in combining our, and as mentioned by our guest speaker, technical, institutional, social, and financial dimensions in order to adapt to an increasingly complex global environment. I thank you very much.
No, thank you very much for that. I think, it touches also on the point that was made by Professor Waiwe when it comes to the state, but also the other groups and interest groups within society There has to be complementarity. They cannot be working against each other. The private sector cannot be working against, the state. They have to be driving a common vision, essentially. And I think this is really quite important. I mean, you mentioned the inadequacies that are found in implementation, accountability, despite, having good plans, but also the scale. We have the opportunity to have scale in Africa. And so the work that you do when it comes to working with member states to build up their capabilities to deliver to their citizens. Because if we are indeed to move towards regional integration, you have a much greater quality when it comes to the regional integration when you have capable states integrating with each other and building, that scale. But a last point, I think the element of continuity is really quite important, both within or both across administrations, but also within institutions as you have turnover. So this is also something that is really quite important. So thank you very much for that. Colleagues, our last speaker is Professor Siphamandla Zondi, who is the director at the Institute for Pan-African Thought and Conversation at the University of Johannesburg. He should be online. Let's just check if he is with us.
Good morning, or good day to those who are in a different time zone. Thank you very much, Siphamandla Zondi here. We appreciate it. Thank you so much, Dr. Mthembu, and thanks to the presenters and the main speaker. Allow me to just contribute to this conversation, the G20 dimension, and perhaps the international dimension. And I'm going to just look just specifically at what the G20 has been grappling with in relation to state capacity and development, mainly because the G20 is responsible for questions of economic governance and development. And I want to figure out how does the state capacity matter gets to be addressed in that period, because this conversation is a G20 symposium. Yes, let me just make the first point as follows. The G20 has to help countries and help the world not just achieve financial stability and economic stability and predictability, but it has also to ensure that these are sustained over a period of time on the basis that economic stability must lead to social stability and therefore development outcomes. And therefore, though the G20 is a pretty much economy finance body, it has to interest itself in the broader questions related to development, and therefore governance becomes inevitable. Now, I want to say it's not just a question of implied, it's not just a question of out of necessity, but it's also a question of what the G20 itself has grappled with now in more direct ways. The G20 Seoul Development Consensus that began in 2010, that led to the Development Working Group, one of the biggest working group in other G20, underlines the role of the state and the state intervention in ensuring that there is economic development, and therefore economic growth and stability should produce an improved quality of life for people. Similarly, the G20 framework on urban capacity building planning tools for local administration has very extensive things it says in relation to how the critical role of the state in achieving the principal G20 objectives around economic governance and and economic development and economic growth generally. So these establish that it is a matter of formality, consensus within the G20 that without state intervention, development, especially in the developing world, will not happen. That without a state intervention, even planning for development, for spatial transformation and all of those kinds of things, absolutely critical for local economic development, would not happen. Now, the development consensus makes this point that development is primarily the responsibility of developing countries themselves, and it goes on to say the governments and the states of the developing countries have an absolutely critical role to do this. And that underlines 2 points at the same time. The one is that the development is a sovereignty issue. It cannot be exported from outside or imposed from outside, but also that the states in these countries have a huge responsibility, central responsibility to achieve this. This is the third point made there is that the state needs to have a policy space and institutional capacity to design and implement their own development strategy, and that the G20 and the G20 Working Group its responsibility is to reinforce this, is to provide whatever advice, provide a space for conversation, provide a space for certain decisions that are made, and provide a space for removing all sorts of obstacles to ample policy space and institutional capacity for countries to develop their own development strategy. And therefore, South Africa's own development, overall development strategy called the National Development Plan finds protection from the G20 Seoul Development Consensus and may find catalysis and also from that, depending on how well the South African state itself prosecute its own national development plan. The fourth point being made from the G20 thing is the Seoul consensus is that the states are important for mobilizing domestic resources, and that domestic resources aren't going to be mobilized, won't mobilize themselves, but nation states are going to have to do this. And therefore, they have to put together efficient tax systems that can do this, efficient management of the financial sector, effective public administration and fiscal oversight for purposes of harnessing domestic resources that a state needs in order to drive its development. And whatever comes from outside is enhances what is already embedded by domestic resource mobilization. And the fifth point the consensus make is that institutional capacities of states, therefore, especially the capacity to plan, to finance, and to manage a large-scale project is critical for achievement of the big infrastructure goals. And as you know, infrastructure is one of the key drivers of the G20 economic agenda, and that if countries invest amply in infrastructure, especially transport infrastructure, energy infrastructure, water infrastructure, and now IT, data infrastructure, that all of those, if you're able to do them well, you will be able to build sustained economic development. But you can't do that without an institutional capacity of the state to drive such infrastructure goals. Private sector doesn't actually drive big infrastructure goals of a national nature and that are linked to development. They can implement infrastructure goals, but they need a state to direct and to provide the cushioning, including reducing the costs of doing this business. The sixth point is that the state capacity is also that which lies behind the resilience against crisis, natural disasters and all that. You can't have resilience in any economy, any state, in any society, unless you have state capacity to ensure that resilience. And if you don't have that resilience, all economies are under threat, and whatever economic goals we have cannot be sustained. It's true for South Africa, it's true for all members of the G20. The 8-point made is that the state capacity building, the building of the capacity of the state, though, is something that does not belong to us all, but it is a context specific. It's a context specific issue. It depends on each state, each condition, that. So for that reason, the state is absolutely critical in its own context. And lastly, I'd like to quote from the consensus, the specific point it makes in the summit that gave rise to the consensus. It says national ownership and appropriate policy space are vital for development. Each country should be able to choose its own development path, supported by strengthening its institutional and human capacities to ensure sustainable growth and resilience. And that was the overriding thing. Now, quickly, a few other things to make. If we look at the recent G20 presidency, the Brazilian presidency placed governance at the center for the achievement of goals, especially goals related to inclusion, related to energy transition, related to fighting hunger and food security, including governance at the national level. The Indian presidency before that also emphasize the importance of national state capacities for building regional corridors. The South African presidency will not avoid also placing state capacity, especially in relation to enhancing Africa's economic development aspirations. Then if you look at the decisions that have been made, some of the critical decisions, including decisions such as the commitment to the independence of the central bank, it speaks to the capacity of the state to ensure that the independence, or to be assured by that independence. The reform of the trade system has a big element there related to bilateral investment and trade arrangements that require the capacity of the state to negotiate and the capacity of the state to implement and capacity to legislate. Then the questions of debt restructuring and support and transparency, they all bring to the fore how the capacity of the state or incapacity of the state either harms or harnesses possibilities. Scientific cooperation and global South engagement also center around the state. Most G20 national development plans, they anchor state in capabilities. The South African one does, the Chinese one does, the UK one, the US one, they all do. And they also all anchor the balance between economic and governance reform. And then the use of the state to drive economy. It doesn't matter what type of state it is, whether it's capitalistic or socialist, or whether it is of any form. They emphasize this. But state capacity remains pretty much a national function. And then therefore, lack of state capacity leads to lack of progress in building national capacity. That's one of the biggest challenges. That because states have to depend on themselves to build the capacity, when they don't have the capacity, they don't therefore have the capacity to build the capacity. So it's kind of a chicken and egg problem. If we're going to say the capacity for South Africa to implement policy has to be the responsibility of South Africa, but if South Africa has no capacity, it means it does not have the ability to build the capacity. It's one of those things. How does it do it while it protects its national sovereignty? And the second issue, the state capacity, especially in the global South, requires the capacity of regional state systems. And therefore, regional integration is absolutely important. The third point is that the governance reforms that are required under the G20 aren't actually guided by the G20 itself, but are guided by the UN. But they are discussed also in the G20, and therefore that coherent and cooperation between those two arms of our international system needs to be much stronger. There's also a question I have in mind about whether excellence in some state in relation to state capacity to drive development, whether by virtue of all being together in the G20, whether that could lead to excellence rubbing off those who are not yet there, I do not know. Looking ahead, though, capacity is going to be central for governance, for finance and inclusivity, the long-term agenda of the G20, global improvements in state capacity. They've started to emerge, especially in Africa and Asia, thanks to APRM and other mechanisms, but it's nowhere near enough. It's still far, far, far from what we need to do. The G20 engagement groups have all now started to take up the question of governance as a critical issue, almost bringing governance into the G20, which also has its own risks of taking the UN agenda and taking it to the G20. And lastly, the link between governance and development is not fully appreciated still in the G20 agreements. Thank you very much. I thought I've shared those thoughts, and I hope it will help us debate. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Prof. Zondi. Taking us to the G20 and the global dimension of all of these debates and how they've evolved. And I think what's key also here is that in the last few presidencies of the G20, which have been led by leading countries of the global south, they have recognized the importance of the role of the state. And although you also caution that it's also important to not necessarily take away from some of the key debates that are taking place within the United Nations. And so there's also a bit of a cautionary tale. But also, I think what's important is that Seoul development consensus has certainly become quite critical. I mean, we've seen in recent years that even countries that were saying, that were sort of pushing a Washington consensus, that were pushing for a limited role of the state, even those countries have come to realize that if they are to navigate this changing international landscape, it is absolutely critical for themselves also to rebuild their own capabilities. So we cannot do away with the state, and the state is absolutely vital. But there is also, as Prof. Zondi says, sort of a chicken and egg situation. How do we build the capabilities, or how do we assist in building the capabilities of states that lack capability, knowing fully well that that is, a national project, that is a national competency. And therefore, that is also, I think, quite important. And it goes back to also what Professor Waiwei said earlier around cooperation, around sharing examples. And this is quite key. So colleagues, we do have ability to take a few questions before we close today's discussion. It's been quite a rich discussion with a lot of ideas shared, a lot of experiences shared by both practitioners and scholars, people who really transverse those, two worlds and able to merge it and bring it together. So what I'll do is I'll just recognize a few hands. Please introduce yourself, and then feel free to comment. But also feel free to pose a question. I know that normally the first question, everyone is waiting to see who poses it. So what I'd like to do is do a random one, and I was actually going to point to you. So thank you for raising your hand. So I'll start over there, and then I'll come to this second row. Is there a mic that is out there? In fact, I can also just stand and stretch my legs. Yeah. All right. So let's start over here.
Good afternoon. Good morning. My name is Itumeleng. I'm from the University of Pretoria, doing my PhD on the South Africa and China relations. And I would like to ask Zhang Laoshi a question. You mentioned the military capability and prowess of China. And I'm very, very happy that you delved into that direction, because in my experience, I was very, very surprised about what the Chinese are being able to do within the space of 40 years. If you go, for instance, to Zhuzhou in Changsha, every Friday evening, you will find the fireworks that are displayed every Friday without fail for about an hour. But they so beautifully operated that a car that is 2 kilometers away, when these explosions are busy going on, the alarm is going off. And every time I went there, I thought to myself, this looks to me that the Chinese are trying to say that they know their business when it comes to explosions and military capability. It just gave me that vibe about it, apart from the beauty of the art. Secondly, if you go everywhere, especially in the big cities, you go to Guangzhou or Beijing, even in Shanghai, as a foreigner, you will struggle to get accommodation in many hotels as a foreign passport holder, because the reason is mainly, no, it's because of the military installations that is close by. And this tells me that China's got a lot of military installation within the cities and is very prepared for any eventuality. During the day, I pick up also that in the skies, it's F-150s that are flying in the skies just for the sake of it, of patrolling, I don't know what. But I'm just trying to say to you that it is very palpable to me that China is very, 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 very prepared, and your figures and your examples are pointing to that direction. But now you might be aware that what is happening here between South Africa and the United States at the moment, it seems like the United States is slaughtering a chicken to scare off the monkey, sort of thing, to use a Chinese proverb. Should the escalation happen between the United States and America, because this conversation does not look very good as it's going on, despite the tariffs and all the rest of it. The question is, finally, sorry, sir, should this thing escalate to a proportion that we don't want to see, can South Africa rely on China, its all-weather friend, for rescue should it be attacked? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Prof, for the insightful presentation and all the panelists. My comment, first of all, is that I appreciate that all of you touch on the new public management, whereby there has to be collaboration between the private sector, communities, and the state or government. And then my question is that in the 21st century, there is a debate about a political administration dichotomy, whereby we usually talk about the separation between politics and government, because when you look at the South African state of politics currently, or the public administration, there's a lot of intervention from politicians. That's why we are currently grappling with corruption, mismanagement of funds, and then there's lack of accountability, and people are not able to hold the state accountable. So when I look at that, my analysis is that when we usually talk about state capacity, we look about educating the public servant, but then we leave behind the actual citizens, because I think capacitating the state, it should also involve the people on the ground, because they are the ones who should be able to hold the state accountable. So I don't know how we can do it, so that we can also educate our people on the ground, because they're the ones who should be able to raise their voices or also come up with the solution. And then collaboration shouldn't be limited only to private companies. Even the NGOs or people on the ground, they should assist building the societies. So that's my submission for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll go back to our speakers. I have a general question for all of our panelists. Professor Margolin mentioned the risks of absolutizing the principle of meritocracy. Now, my question is really around what is the role of political education for administrators? Sort of the concern here, I think, is sort of based on today's discussion, but also a discussion that I heard Prof. Ngaweni actually having recently around if you have sort of just what we think at times of technocrats. Sometimes the discussion is almost as though you are trying to depoliticize, sort of the state. And that you sort of have almost like machine-like competent, individuals who simply implement, at the level of the state. So what is the role of political education, I think, in the administration, in public administration? I think that's a general question.
Three great questions. I will go with one by one briefly. Now, concerning this PhD's interesting question about Chinese military modernization, and you don't forget, China is the country that invented powder and fireworks. So actually, what's amazing today is China is also the best in drones. We could simultaneously control thousands of drones for hours without problems whatsoever. So this is part of this progress. China is also much better than the United States in radar system, much better. The problem is crucial message is the material that we have, the United States don't have, so they cannot match us. I also mentioned this wind tunnels, which means the United States cannot match us. So unless the countries fight a nuclear war, which will be the end of the world, I don't think that will happen. So it's still in the field of conventional weapons. To be honest, China is now ahead of the United States in many areas. So I don't think the United States will provoke a war. Their military knows very well. Their politicians could be the big mouths, talk about everything, but their military men are very cautious. Same with Chinese, we're also very cautious. I said that China, as a civilizational state, we declared very openly, will not be the first to use nuclear weapons, will not be the first to firing shots. So we are going to be very defensive and reactive. So that's one way with the rise of China as a military superpower. Maybe it's more in the interest of global peace. Yeah. And we'll see United States intervene, whatever, a war situation with regard to China. We're firing warning shots once, twice, the third time, and they are going to withdraw. I'm pretty sure about this. So this is no, your feeling of your foreign passport and you go to the hotels, they do not allow you, etc. These are exceptional cases. In fact, China now, because we have 1 year ago for over 50 countries, so Chinese foreign tourists have come, this whole number goes up to the pre-COVID level already. And what problem is at that time, because the problem of payment, because in China we already become cashless society. We use phone for paying everything. So you have to have this new gadget apps to install on it. Now it's all very smooth. For foreign passports as well, there used to be more difficulty. Now it's very smooth because the hotel feel more complicated. You have to install everything, scan the face, whatever. Now it's very easy. Yeah, you are not encounter that problem. China is very transparent, very open country, but it's true. We're prepared for against war. Yeah, and for instance, it's not a secret. All Chinese railway stations, there are always a military representative. In case of war, this whole system can be turned into shipping weapons, tanks, missiles. So this is much stronger than the US system. Yeah, because China experienced so many wars, for over 100 years. We call the century of humiliations, bullied by Western powers, by the Japanese. Our capitals were occupied many times, by foreign powers. So that's why the CPC is so popular in China, because build up a powerful military. They can defeat these superpowers. We fought with the Americans, the Korean battlefield, when China was 100 times weaker than today. But Chairman Mao said we should fight to dead end. So the United States had to withdraw. So this spirit is still there. Come to this second question concerning, or your question concerning education, the third question. I'll give an example, a story. When the United States began to sanction Chinese high-tech companies, and we are a think tank, so we go to a field study of these Chinese companies. We go to one of them. They have a slogan, a banner, red banner in their canteen. Take up the guns and go to fight. The spirit of Chinese Communist Party. So we don't buy this so-called political neutrality, people-centered, and national revival, what's called the reinvigoration. Yeah, political objective. No, I think it's, I don't know why, in many African countries, after full independence, or the political party used to be revolutionary party, now became Western style party, whatever. So neutrality, Chinese Communist Party, no. We make very sure that revolutionary purpose, build socialism. And if you read Chairman Mao, in 1957, he made a remark. He said, China is supposed to be socialist. Socialism is supposed to be better than capitalism. If we cannot catch up with the United States or surpass the United States within 5 or 6 decades, we cannot be considered as a member of the international community. So this kind of zeal is always there. This is very important, And civil servants, because Chinese Communist Party is an interesting institution. It's not a Western style party. It's a party of governance. So at each and every level, companies, societies, and organizations, they are party secretary. A university have party secretary. And he's number one. In province, he's number one party secretary, and then the government. So we open in the constitution, leadership of the party is crucial. But Chinese Communist Party is not partisan party. It's not election party. It's the institution. It's in the ancient time, we call this unified ruling entity, buttressed by Chinese style meritocracy, selection plus election. The competent people come to the top. That's it. The system is very vigorous. And our purpose is serving the people wholeheartedly. CPC openly say we don't have private any particular interest to our party. The party is for the people. And this is at least accepted by Chinese people, by most Chinese. That's important. Because the Revolutionary Party is a party fought 22 years of armed struggle, then came to power. after 22 years armed struggle, for the war with the United States twice, and then lead China to today's success. And then it's not a political party in the Western sense. It's the institution. If party is over, China is over. That's it. Yeah. If China, the party is successful, country is successful. It's this kind of integration you understand better. And furthermore, in China, this is almost common sense. You know. But in the West, because the idea political party, interest party is partial partisan party. So as election party, as I said, as a civilizational state, it goes by its own cycles. It's not goes by 5 years, 4 years. No, this is ridiculous. We understand the Western model is for relatively small countries. And for big country like China, for 1.4 billion people, it will not work that well. So I debated with Professor Fukuyama. He said, you need a political reform. I said, United States need more political reform. As your system very archaic, you know. And then we made a forecast. I said, I'm afraid you're going to produce a leader next time, worse off than George W. Bush. We debated in 2011, different systems. So now we're very confident, you know. I said, if this political party, the state cannot make plans, cannot pursue long-term objectives, cannot make reforms, can only have election and win the election. So it has to do with the development, with modernization, with reforms. So it's entirely a new paradigm, totally different. Yeah. So that's Mike. Now consider your question about the social influence and getting more people involved. The Chinese practice is very, very simple. What do we call the democratic centralism? This is something from Soviet Union, but we have it renovated. From the people, to the people, to the people, from the people. If you only have democracy, means people's participation, but without centralized whatever, centralization, that's a populism. Yeah. If you both have democracy, full discussion, and then you have a good leadership of the party or other institutions, what we call it. We collect enough opinions, have them thoroughly discussed, and then go back to the people, one round. If not enough, another round. If not, another round. If you look at the 5-year plan produced by the Chinese Communist Party Central Committee as State Commission for Reform, so sophisticated. 3 levels: central government, provincial, zone 4-2, regional plan, special like Pearl River Delta around the Canton, Shenzhen, Hong Kong. That's a regional plan. And spatial plan, because vast country, how to protect wildlife, how to protect agricultural zones. So all these, you know, were strict red line for the size of arable land. Yeah, because China people's food, that's important and be guaranteed. And then specialized plan, like plan for AI development, plan for military modernization, this separate individual plan. So very clear, very sophisticated. And then you can look at the economic, if you study Chinese macroeconomy, Chinese economic development, don't believe in Wall Street, whatever report. Look at how China does. Every year, we have a 5-year plan. We also have a longer term plan, the plan for 2050, the plan for 2035, and every 5-year plan and every year plan, yearly plan. And then every year, the People's Congress convenes in February, what we call the 2 sessions, People's Congress, Political Consultative Conference, almost like upper house, lower house, and they consider that they will discuss how the plan is executed. They will discuss. If you read the premier of China's report to the 2 sessions, they will say, last year, we made a commitment to fulfill, let's say, 11 tasks. Now have fulfilled by now 10. when not fulfilled. Accountability, very strict. Yeah. If not accomplished, what's wrong with the problem? Problem of the plan or the problem the execution? Yeah, and examining. And then same with every November, end of the year, or December, the party conference on economic affairs to again discuss to what extent our plan has been executed, whether we have to make adjustment. I'll give you a concrete example. I don't know how that happens to South Africa. In Germany, I think it's very stupid. This Green Party advocates renewable energy. So they literally, dismantled high quality coal powered plants, first rate, by this international standard. And they also dismantled these nuclear plants. And their renewable energy cannot catch up with the demand. It's a 30% shortage. And there's no way, And then Biden declared that we no longer follow this climate change or whatever. So this politically correctness is abandoned by the superpower United States. But for China, we made a plan very seriously and in China's own interest, because China is a larger power. Our energy dependency on oil, on petrol, on natural gas is heavy. But we also have a certain period of time we said, let's do away with coal mine, coal power plant. But soon, within 1 year and a half, we realized the mistake is made, that we can rebuild, continue this coal-fired plant, modernized, super modern, so they are less polluting. So today, China's renewable energy and plus traditional energy together make China energy dependency 85% independent, autonomy. In other words, crucial. So the so-called dependency on Malacca Strait is drastically reduced. So this is a long planning and commitment, and then make timely readjustment to, if made mistake, correct it. So from the people to the point that you can have feedback from the people, and to see whether then you not take populist approach, seek truth from facts. You have certain things which populist do not really reveal national real interest of your country, but you have long-term interests there. So this is my brief answer.
No, thank you for that, Prof. I think also probably before I bring in the other speakers, I think we also missed a potential question here on the online platform. I think if we could ask maybe our technicians to assist Professor Anna Katarina Hornich to basically come in. And I found it interesting before you come in. I found it interesting in the earlier discussion how China was also in its own move towards building high tech, manufacturing, was also inspired by a plan that Germany had designed previously, but obviously adapted it for its own conditions. So Professor Anna Katarina Hornich, I think the floor is yours. If you could please unmute. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, thank you so much, Filani. Thank you for the kind invitation and the very, very interesting discussions that I followed throughout the morning here in Germany. I want to come in with two comments, I think, mainly. They are less questions, but also in a way comments that, in order to give you an insight into how I was listening from Germany to the debates. And the first one is that, to be honest, I hear a lot of sort of a dialogue of competition and national interests in some of the presented, and I'm a little bit startled by it, simply because this is a think tank community. And of course, I mean, we are all very well aware of the fact that the whole song of competition and national interests is unfortunately the one that is determining a lot of the geopolitical interactions right now and since quite a while already. But I would argue that the think tank community and also the research community should play a different role, should rather, instead of underlining competitive approaches to international relations, underline cooperative approaches. And maybe there is a question in there to the panelists, because of course we're also here in the setting of the G20 and the Think 20, and we see globally, not only on the political level, the competition and national interests determining more and more international relations, but we also see that the multilateral system is no longer fit to fulfill the mandate of bringing the international community of states together in order to address the global challenges. So the plurilateral, such as the G20, as well as some regional fora, become more and more important. So isn't that even more underlining the need to ensure that within the G20 or within also other plurilateral, minilateral, trilateral, etc. formats, we find a way of focusing on where we agree on, where we do converge, where we do want to cooperate between equals and or with jointly negotiated interests, maybe to put it that way, while fully aware that on the geopolitical level, competition and in some ways, or in many ways, also very destructive competition is the main. So this is sort of my reading combined with a question to the plurilateral, but also combined with the question of what is the role of the think tank community and the research community. And I would argue it's definitely a different role than the competition-focused take that we observe on the geopolitical level. And I would hope that we find ways of steering the plurilateral formats in a cooperative manner and towards addressing the global challenges that continue to exist, irrespective of whether we disagree and compete on many other fronts. Thanks.
No, thank you very much for that. So really bringing in also the role of the research community as either amplifying, let's say, the competition amongst states, or as one of actually also building bridges and enhancing, cooperation, maybe even at times diffusing tensions amongst states. So really, what role for the research community, in this changing geopolitical landscape? I would ask our fellow panelists to come in, both in terms of some of the inputs that we received in the previous round of questions, but also just in terms of some of the responses. And also, I think anything else that you have picked up that you would like to, sort of throw into the discussion, particularly before we close today's discussion. So what I would like to ask is for Professor Margolin to just come back on the platform, and then I'll just ask the panelists, to speak in their order before we close the session. Also, is it possible if we could read these questions? I think that I've just been alerted that there are 2 questions online. Is it possible to show them? There we go. Okay, so I can read them before we ask our panelists to come in. So the first one is from Pascal Molloy, It says, how do we build a national vision and consensus in the current South African context? My view is that the dogma versus truth scenario needs to be broken down between the state and society actors. The state of our political systems, including the selection and election system, is a barrier for meaningful change today. So really bring it down to the South African context also. So any of our panelists, please take note of that. The second question is from Lebu Twala, who says, Professor Waiwe, you mentioned that for institutions to endure, they must be rooted in indigenous identity. China has been able to build on its civilizational continuity, while South Africa's colonial and apartheid past fractured ours. How does this difference shape our ability to build state capacity, and what lessons can we realistically draw from China's experience? So those are the two that are coming from online. And as our panelists come in, I'd like you to factor in the role of research institutions, the role of think tanks, either as amplifying or actually de-escalating the tensions amongst states. And then also keep in mind the previous round's question around in building a competent meritocratic, sort of apparatus, what role again, for political education in that. So I don't know if our professor at the Russian Presidential Academy is still online. If he could start, then we could go to the other panelists. So Professor Margolin. Okay, maybe whilst he is coming in, we could ask, he can just alert us when he's ready. We could ask Dr. Masiteng.
Thank you very much. I think I just want to agree with is it on? Is it my voice? Okay. I just want to agree with the comment that has been made in terms of the role of states in their collaboration with the private sector, that it is not only about the private sector. And as I think I made an example that the new way of doing things is to consider what is called the whole of government, whole of society. And in many of the areas, as modernization happens, there is an issue that is starting to promote what is called active citizenry. Active citizenry is not a favor made for the people or to the citizens. It's for the citizens to be part of the deliberations about the development agenda of the country in a manner that those that are given responsibility are able to account to the citizens. How we do it, I think there are more lessons that can be brought in, but active and participatory type of governance can be able to assist in terms of making sure that those that are given responsibility are able to account. Then the critical other issues that I thought we can deal with are looking at going forward. And I would also want to talk to the issue of the role of the academia. As I said, I think the theories, when they change, they are discussed in that environment. The arguments are dealt with in those environments. And therefore, the manner in which they get inculcated to the public sector and the rest of the society remains important, so that they do not sit as academic thinking, but they are very important in terms of how they get inculcated into society. And with those, they can help in terms of making sure that we do not fear complexity. We don't fight complexity, but because work is done, research is done, they can help us embrace it because they would have evolution and theories. But also, we should also see the role of investing in data and making sure that evidence is able to be used, and it can run away and take us away from dealing with popularism. Because some people just talk, and sometimes it's I think where we increase the voice and not the argument. And you find that even those that have argument with other voices are higher, they are silenced. So we need to be able to start to really use evidence. And when people have evidence, they can be able to take the country forward. Other critical issues, I think, is building on collaborative governance models, whole of government. And I think some of us have not even understood this whole issue of the national dialogue. I think there is a lot that goes in terms of how even China would say it is about the dialogue first, but it is not to negotiate in that dialogue. It's about building and agreeing on the future for all of us, by all of us, with all of us in the room. But those are some of the lessons that we have not been able to be part of over a long time. And sometimes when we hear other countries have done them, until we do them, become part of them, we understand. And I hope such things would be able to build our country going forward, and fostering citizen engagement and trust. That is going to be very important for us. These are some of the things that are easier said than done. We sit here and we wonder, if you say you're going to foster citizens' trust and engagement, how do you see it happen? But I think other countries have done it. China has done it. Chile has done it. And when you look at what they have done in Chile, it could be lessons that we can bring in and look into. Tailoring the solutions that are locally entrenched, because not every space in this country does not have capacity, but there are spaces in the country that can give us best practices that we can learn from. There's a model that is, I think we have learned from was it Kenya principle, where we went there and we find that they are able to take all services of government, they are put under one roof, and they function. So there are many lessons also that we can take from different countries, but we can also know that there are best practices within the country that can be elevated for the people and by the people themselves. Thanks.
Thank you for that. Let's ask Mr. Jama to come in.
Thank you, Dr. Ntambu. So I think for me, a lot of what has been said, without going over it again, I'll just highlight some of our perspective. So with respect to the civil society inclusion, it's something we have been working on at the union, and across the board in all our member states. We have national governance commissions, which include civil society, which include private sector, which include government, and government not only at the state level, but also at the decentralized level. So that's the model. And many of our member states have done that. Kenya, for example, has now created what they call a county peer review system, where all 47 counties talk to each other, and they even share best practices. So you don't even need to go all the way to Chile. You can actually have to say, where in our continent is something being done correctly? How can we learn from them? And we have, so for example, Namibia went to Rwanda and Egypt to learn something about how certain administrative reforms are being done. And we're doing that across the board, and we're facilitating that discussion. But we make sure that we include civil society, because when we do our recommendations, to make sure that implementation is being done, we really need the grassroots, county level, municipal level, all the way up to the national level. We need them to be able to say, yes, this was done, and it was done in such a manner, so we can learn from it. The feedback that Professor was talking about, that is clear. Otherwise, you're just, you are going without really reflecting, and the reflecting is part of good governance. It's really an important part, the feedback mechanism. Secondly, with respect to political education of the technical layer, that is critical, because there are, at all levels, there is a point at which a political decision has to be made. You might have 1 or 2 or 3 options, and at that time it has to go back to the political layer. So a technician has to be able to know at what level he or she can perform, and then to wait for a political response to the different roads that can be taken. So it's very important to be aware. It's almost like in the private sector, what they call up up management. You have to not only work with your colleagues, but you must also know what your bosses would like to do. So that's a very critical part of our work, our day-to-day work. And then thirdly, I think what Professor Katerina was saying about what is the role of think tanks and academia. And yes, it's also part of this global learning commendable practices. There are so many intractable, so to speak, intractable challenges that if we work together, we can solve. And it can be done through a cooperative mechanism. So, for example, climate change, among other issues, can only really be solved if we all work together in a cooperative manner without this competitive mindset. So I agree. And in fact, that's what we do when we do our reports at APRM level and then at the regional level. We table it, heads of state discuss, and we talk about commendable practices, how we can learn from each other, and how we can work together to solve some common challenges, whether it's land, elections, etc. Thank you very much.
No, thank you very much for that. Let me check if Professor Zondi is there. Yes, Professor Zondi, if you could also come in and some of your parting shots also.
Yeah, and a couple of points. The point made by Lebu Twala is an absolutely critical one. Reflecting on what Professor Wei had actually indicated earlier, that like a number of Southeast Asian countries, your Singapore, your Vietnam and others, the Chinese are building, and Japan, the Chinese are building upon their indigenous civilization. So there is almost a 5-6 century of continuity that they are building upon. Hard work, of course, institutions, leadership, and all of those things needed to be done, but they are building upon an existing fabric. We don't have that fabric. Our evolution of our civilization was abruptly ended. And in place of it, a badly patched up element of Western civilization was put in place. So we are busy trying to build, but we are building on a very broken fabric. And we keep trying to build on that very fabric. And many African scholars have long told us this, that you simply just cannot build on what you inherited. An African proverb says, borrowed waters won't quench your thirst. However much we do, part of the failure of the AU right now, the failure of the APRM system with all of the great things of it, failure of the many things, the failure of the Agenda 2063 that we will register in the next 30 years will be because we are not addressing the fundamentals. If the fabric on which we are building on is bewitched, it is broken, it is shivering, it is weak, it's not designed for what we are trying to do, no amount of effort we are going to do is going to change it. No amount of borrowing from east or from west or from wherever is going to help us. We just lack the bold leadership that we need to bridge us from what was inherited from colonialism, which we are keeping to this day, and what we need for post-colonialism, so that we are not trapped in this colonial element where we are right now. It's a real serious problem. You will just have to see that in a number of our countries, the state only exists in the capital city. Outside the capital city is a no man's land. That is why when there's a rebellion, it can exist in a country for 3 months and nobody knows it was existing until it gets to where the head of state is found. So the head of state and the government is where it's secure. The state exists around there. Doesn't exist for the rest of the people. That is how it was designed. Colonial forces did not need to build a state that is completely total, that is in complete control of the entire territory. They wanted a state that will be at the headquarters that are linked to the imperial headquarters. And we have simply maintained that. So our paradigm is fundamentally a crisis of leadership. We have not had the leadership we needed for the past 70 years. We just don't have it. We don't have it today. We have not had it for the past 70 years. What I mean is a leadership that is willing to confront the real problem. Not a leadership that's looking at sprucing up nice things. I see now some positive signs that, oh, South Africa is doing this, Kenya is doing this, Rwanda is doing this. All of the things we are praising are very surface issues, are things that are not sustainable. Until we fix the fundamentals, none of the things we try to do will happen. The African proverb says, however long a log of wood stays underwater, it will not become a crocodile. Whatever we try with all the things we have, unless we fix it, it will not become what we want to do. So ours is that we do not have that bold leadership that led other countries out of the quagmire. The South Koreans, the Chinese, the Japanese, and others. We just don't have that leadership. Unfortunately, even our political education, Dr. Mtembu, is not looking at that. Our political education assumes everything is fine. We're educating people about how to vote, educating people how to build a better political parties, stronger institutions. We're asking people to fix a surface that is not actually the broken problem. And no political education is saying, how do we reimagine the state? How do we seize the current state? Because Nyorere did say at some point that for the birth of a state we are looking for, the current state must die. It sounds idealistic, but that is how it is. The state you have was, Ali Masri calls it the curse of Berlin. It's a curse, it's a curse thing. It can't be used. If you use it, it kills you. If it uses, it kills your dream. So we have that fundamental problem, Lebo, indeed. We don't have a civilization to build upon. So we now have to, instead of borrowing the Western civilization or borrowing the Eastern civilization or any other civilization, is to innovate on the basis of our history and what we have survived. A new way of managing our power and political authority and perhaps the plans going forward. But there is no courage to do that, unfortunately. Sadly so. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Prof. Zondi. I think, you mentioned basically the fundamentals have to be correct. The foundation that you use to build from. And if you don't address that, then unfortunately, whatever you build, after that does not really address the fundamental challenges that you face. And unfortunately, that is a challenge of state formation on the African continent and in other places of the world. So colleagues, I think let's also then with that have a final word from Professor Waiwei. You've listened to the discussion, you've stimulated the discussion earlier today. And I think we've had a very interesting, robust engagement, a lot of ideas certainly generated. I think we've learned also a lot, but also been able to exchange a lot. So if you could just give us some of your final words before we hand back to our program director.
Thank you. And I will make a couple of brief points. The first concerning this German scholar concerning the role of think tank. And yes, I agree with her that we should emphasize more cooperation, no doubt about this. But I really hope that as she's a German and working in a German think tank, she should tell this idea to EU. EU is an institution have a passion to politicize everything. When China said, let's work together, help Africa with BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, three-party projects, they are very suspicious. And there one successful cooperation we did for hydraulic jet dam in Ethiopia. And then from then on, it's always geopolitical consideration, suspicious. We don't do this with China. And it had to do also with the German media. I've been to Germany many times. It's so negative about China, about Xinjiang. And as a result, sometimes I don't want to debate with these media and these politicians. I say, live in darkness, What can we do, I give Xinjiang has one of the world's largest deserts. It's called Taklamakan, which is the size of Germany. Now China turned this whole desert into a fertile ground for agriculture and for desert reclamation. Millions and millions of solar panels are stored there, installed there. And Xinjiang, as a result, become the least expensive power supply in the world, in China at least. And then Xinjiang has also become one of the largest producers of grain, rice, corn, wheat. Unimaginable in China, in the world, human history. But if you look at German media, Western media, so negative. So, all for ordinary Chinese, it's laughable. How can we do about this, So everything is politicized. That's the key problem with European media and European EU leaders. They have to, gradually remove. We have a lot of sympathy, for EU, even today for Germany. Such a powerful economy now weakened by this incompetent leaders from EU and from others. Really, it's damaging German industry. German energy self-sufficiency is only 40%, even less than 40%. Yet the Nord Stream was bombed. No one dared to challenge the United States. Strange, you have to be independent. Otherwise, EU and Europe will go way down. That's my prediction. Now, second question concerning, again, I forgot to answer from our PhD friend, concerning South Africa as always a friend of China, whether China can come to defend South Africa. I'm not myself a military expert, but always a friend. That's extremely important for China. Chinese, the style is, we're on the whole very prudent. But if we make a promise, we deliver. Yeah. Unlike EU, China acts, EU talks. Yeah, that's the difference between the two regions. Yeah. And for instance, Pakistan and China are always a friend. We supply them with this like AWACS system, first-rate jet, plus missiles. And very importantly, the data linkage, discovery and destruction. So that's first rate. India no longer dare to challenge Pakistan militarily. Full stop. Yeah. Because it's a generational gap. It's different. Same with Serbia. Again, China's always a friend, small country. China supplied a few years ago a whole system of missile defense system. With this system installed, there'll be no NATO bombing again, as that did in 1999. Yeah. There are all kinds of methods to help our always friends. So this is a key message. China means its words if it's really a friend. China is honored as part of civilizational tradition. Yeah, we do what we promise. Yeah, really. Or I will stop here. And now, third point is concerning a question about local roots, cultural roots. I think maybe China included, many African countries as well, we need to have a continued process of decolonization of the mind. I was in Russia, and Vladimir Putin started a program to revise textbooks in liberal arts and humanities and social sciences. He said they are too much influenced by Western political discourse. This is part of decolonization of minds. I think China is also doing the same. Now, concerning vision for the future, for planning, I noticed a very interesting phenomenon. That is, China has been pursuing this BRI initiative, Belt and Road Initiative, for more than a decade. $1 trillion invested. Roughly 1/3 come to Africa. And over 4,000, 5,000 projects. Most are successful, some less successful, some fail, but most successful. And of all these projects, usually two types are extremely, welcomed by the host countries. One is the idea of zones, industrial zones, science zones. In other words, we have a special area where you first test cooperation. You provide legal service, you provide whatever internet service, all kinds of first-rate service, and then you start companies in this particular zone. Yeah, the idea of zone is one experience from Chinese success. The other is planning. We have think tanks which help work out the plans for not necessarily for a country, but for a city, for a region. But in many countries, they have a lot of regional autonomy. So they say, let's have a plan, or plan together. So to make best use of the technical know-how in strategic planning, etc., from China, from other countries. China learned this from the Soviet Union in the 1950s. We did not know how to produce 5-year plans. And Premier Zhou Enlai led a huge delegation, several hundred of people went to Soviet Union. And we provide to the Soviet experts the first draft China 5-year plan. Oh, that's ridiculous. You cannot do this, you cannot do that. So China began to learn gradually, bit. And in the end, China itself became an expert. And then we reformed the Soviet-style plan into Chinese-style strategic plan rather than mandatory planning. Not planning for how many shoes a factory are going to produce, but direction, AI, which technical routes, which technologies, and which region of China should be the pilot province or pilot region, this kind of thing. So I think that's my brief answers to your questions. Thank you.
Great. No, thank you very much, Prof. I think I've just been informed that our colleague in Russia might be ready, I think, just for his last parting shot. Professor Margolin, are you there? If Prof. Margolin is, if I could maybe see the screen here, just here in the front. There are two people that we wanted to just give a quick word to. One, it's Prof. Margolin, if he is able to come in. But if he is not, then I think we can just allow very briefly Prof. Anna Katarina. I think you asked the question also around, obviously, the cooperation amongst think tanks. Now, we're obviously going to, you know the relationship, obviously, between South Africa and the US currently, and certainly we've, continued to sort of look to build ties with research institutes in the US, irrespective of, the political divisions that we see today. Your institute also was at the helm of the Think 20 at a time when President Trump previously was at the helm in the US. So, maybe just a parting shot also from you in terms of just that cooperation amongst research institutions, amongst think tanks, but then also just any last comment you may have.
Yeah, thank you so much for the second opportunity to come in, and thank you for the range of responses. For us, I mean, here at IDOS, we, as you mentioned already, Filani, we foster cooperation and dialogue processes with research institutions, with university institutions across the globe, and also purposefully where the political dialogue becomes difficult. Yeah, and of course that is increasingly the situation also with the big poles, future poles of that multipolar world, whether it's, as you mentioned now, the US or also China, as you just heard also from my colleague from China. And of course, that is important in order to indeed continue staying in dialogue with each other, and also facilitating our own abilities to listen as well as to talk, which is crucial. Not easy, because the independence of research, I mean, this balancing act between doing politically relevant research, applied research. Our mandate is to do empirically based research on all kinds of sustainability related topics in many different countries, including our own, in Germany and Europe, but especially also across the world. And then to do that in partnership and then carry the research into policy advisory processes. So it has to be applicable and it has to be politically relevant, but it shouldn't be politically biased. And that, of course, becomes very, very tricky. There's the party political element within the a democratic system. Of course, it is important that we maintain party political independence, yeah? So we can advise whichever government comes in, but also, of course, with regard to geopolitical independence. And I think we also heard now from that conversation this morning here that this is a very, it's a substantial challenge. Yeah? We are all in a way biased and co-shaped and influenced by the media environment and the public discourses that we contribute to, but that we also consume in our own national, regional, and trans-regional context. So I can only formulate the plea. I think it's crucially important for a setting such as the Think 20 setting that we all pay very conscious attention to keeping the doors open, keeping the dialogue or facilitating the further dialogue in a respectful manner, fully aware of the fact that the interests and the differences in interests and geopolitical interests between world regions and countries are likely to increase further. And on the other side, pay very close attention to indeed, and here I follow the colleague on the panel who underlined the role of facts, the role of empirically based, solidly collected facts. So we stay as truthful to what we can empirically show and prove as possible in our argumentation. That is, in my view, the biggest challenge that all of us will have to master in the coming years, if we are heading research institutes or think tanks and want to continue engaging and making a difference through transregional dialogue processes. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, and I think that is a good place to end, the current discussion, in a sense that as the world becomes increasingly fractured, geopolitical tensions, crisis in multilateralism, certainly the role of research, the role of dialogue will continue to be amplified. The role of empirical knowledge, and imparting that, but then hopefully building the capabilities of states to actually act on that empirical knowledge. I think this is quite important, a key point that has come out across the discussion throughout this morning. And with that, colleagues, let's give a last round of applause, I think, to our speakers. And then handing back to Mr. Bongani Maimele, our program director.
Thank you, Dr. Mthembu, for that moderation. We are moving towards the end of the program. Only one item is left, which is closing remarks by the NSG. We're speaking about complexity and state capacity. And one thing that we must understand here is that this complexity should not only be understood in the context of global complexity, but also domestic complexity, because there's a lot of contradictions that happen within society in a country, and that can cause lots of contradictions that the state must respond to. I'm going to call upon Mr. Dino Punsami to give closing remarks. But before I do that, just a minute, Dino, I just want to check something. We have Professor Ngaweni here, the former principal, who I believe is a student now. He's sitting here in the audience. student of the NSG taking part. Very welcome to you, Prof, and thank you for coming. I know you and I had a lot of discussions about this topic of the G20, and I didn't see you raise your hand. I thought I'll see you raise your hand. So you do not want to make any proposal on what it will take for the G20 to succeed. It's okay, not today, but I know he has a very substantive views on what it will take for the G20 to succeed. But to summarize that is to say state capacity, agile institutions, because that's how you manage the economy. And I think that's how, as the NSG also, we engage in a lot of economic governance capabilities that we're doing on the African continent. The building of capacity of public officials and politicians on the African continent to engage in meaningful diplomacy and the management of infrastructure as some of the catalysts that are crucial towards achieving development on the African continent. And of course, all of this happened within the context of complexity. Let me not stand between yourselves and lunch and call upon Mr. Dino Punsami to come and give the closing remarks. Thank you very much, Mr. Punsami.
Thank you, Bongani, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for indulging us with the time. We know we've gone a little bit beyond time, but I think it's been a really insightful discussion today. I think, Prof. Zhang, just drawing from your words, we are in times of titanic change and complexity, and I think we have to understand this in this agile public institutions that we have to build the resilience. And I think in all of the conversations we've had, we've seen the thread that requires us to build these agile public institutions. Dr. Mtembo, thank you very much for moderating the session. To all of our speakers online here as well, thank you so much. Thank you to the acting principal for graciously allowing us to convene this symposium, and of course our partners with UNISA. Thank you so much for hosting us here. We are going to invite the colleagues here in the front for a quick photo opportunity, Zenzele, and then we'll break for lunch. But thank you so much to all of you for being here. Prof. Zhang, always welcome to South Africa. It's always great to see you here. Thank you very much, colleagues.